My own father stood in front of a judge and declared that I was mentally incompetent to handle my own life. Douglas wiped a tear from his eye, pretending to be a grieving parent while the relatives he invited watched my public ruin. I did not scream or argue with his lies because I knew his entire world was about to end in exactly 3 minutes. Douglas sat down next to his lawyer, adjusting his expensive tie with absolute satisfaction. The courtroom remained completely quiet, heavy with the silent judgment of my aunts and cousins who expected me to break down. They wanted Valerie, the quiet daughter, to beg for mercy, but I sat perfectly still in the sterile room and waited for my turn. Judge Harrison peered over her glasses, asking if I had any response to the severe accusations regarding my mental capacity and the family estate. Douglas leaned forward like a wolf waiting for me to lose control, which was his favorite weapon. I refused to give him the emotional reaction he wanted, using silence to starve him of power. I stood up slowly and told the judge I was simply waiting for my father to finish his grand, theatrical performance. The confident grin of Douglas vanished instantly, and his lawyer, Vance, began tapping his pen in a nervous panic. Vance knew the truth because he was the one who had helped forge the documents to set this trap. Douglas believed he was moments away from gaining legal control over me and the $5 million left in my inheritance. He thought my quiet lifestyle in a tiny studio apartment was proof that I was failing at life. He did not know that I lived frugally by choice while building a massive financial empire behind his back. While my father drove luxury cars leased under my stolen identity, I was quietly managing a $15 million portfolio for major private firms. Every time he called me worthless, I transferred money into private investment accounts and bought the debt on his precious country club. I was not his victim, I was secretly becoming his largest creditor. My father did not want to protect me. He wanted to save himself from his own mounting debts by stealing my assets. I felt no guilt because this was not a family dispute, but a hostile foreclosure on a parasite who had crossed the line. The judge asked if Douglas had any actual proof of my supposed financial incompetence. Vance stood up with trembling hands and presented a stack of financial records to the bench, claiming I had mismanaged my trust. Douglas interrupted his lawyer, loudly shouting that I had lost $750,000 without even noticing it. The family members in the back rows gasped at the mention of such a massive fortune. My father told the judge that massive sums of money had been wired to untraceable offshore accounts over the past 2 years. He claimed I was too mentally disconnected to notice the theft, and requested an emergency order to freeze my assets. Douglas looked at me with pure triumph, believing he had successfully backed me into a corner. The judge asked if I had any explanation for the missing money, and the room fell silent as everyone waited for my tears. I stood up, walked to the bench, and handed Judge Harrison a single blue folder containing a digital map of the transactions. I admitted the money was gone, which made Douglas laugh out loud. I explained to the judge that I had watched every single dollar leave the account because I was tracking the digital footprint. Every unauthorized transaction had originated from the personal computer of my father at his home address. The face of Douglas turned pale as his lawyer grabbed his arm to keep him from screaming. I showed the court that the funds went directly to Apex Consulting, a shell company registered under the maiden name of his secret mistress. The gallery erupted in whispers, and my aunt stared in absolute shock as my father sat frozen. He realized too late that I had spent months documenting his crimes instead of ignoring them. The judge asked why I had allowed him to steal so much money instead of freezing the accounts immediately. I explained that stopping him early would only result in a minor civil dispute and a light warning. I needed him to cross the $500,000 threshold across state lines to trigger a federal criminal case. I looked my father in the eyes and explained that his actions constituted major interstate wire fraud, carrying a 10-year prison sentence. The money he stole was simply the price I paid to buy his federal indictment, and it was worth every cent. Douglas slumped in his chair, realizing he had walked directly into a trap. With a desperate hand, my father pulled a yellowed paper from his briefcase and claimed I had authorized every single transfer. He handed the document to the bailiff, arguing that my signature proved I had given him full control of the trust. He smiled again, telling the judge that my accusations were just paranoid delusions. I recognized the signature immediately because he had slipped the paper into a stack of funeral documents after my grandmother died. The courtroom waited to see if his desperate play would save him from ruin, and Vance looked hopeful again. I acknowledged that the signature was mine, but I told Douglas it would not save his home. I handed the judge a second folder proving I had recently purchased his office building and the mortgage on his private residence. He had not paid his rent in months, and the eviction notices had already been filed with the city that morning. I told my father that he came to take my freedom, but was leaving as my tenant. I placed a full confession and withdrawal of his petition on the table, giving him 30 minutes to sign or face immediate eviction. Douglas signed the documents with a shaking hand, muttering bitter words as his pride collapsed entirely. Within minutes, federal marshals entered the courtroom and arrested him on the spot for his crimes. My family watched in silence as the marshals led my father away in handcuffs, his reputation destroyed forever. I walked out of the courthouse into the fresh air, knowing I had finally reclaimed my life from his abuse. Peace is not something that is given to you.